Okay, this video is what is the best way to learn and to teach history. And where this comes out of is I've been reading Gone with the Wind, and I watched the movie Gone with the Wind, and it was so great that it got me interested in USA Civil War history. And then I started going through the paintings, the music, and some other stuff on it. And so what I'm saying is I've had this experience before as well. Like when I was studying the history of Ireland, I read several histories of Ireland, and they were all decent, but they don't put it all together. But then when I read the book Trinity by Leon Uris about the story of Irish families from about 1800 to the present, then all the historical events of that time, like the Irish famine, for example, and Parnell and whatnot, they just resonated with me so much better. I felt them emotionally, and I could remember the key points better. I had the same experience with reading the book Poland by Michener. That was a great book about families in Poland for hundreds and hundreds of years, and just following one family in particular and the experiences they had. Also, when I look back to studying the Renaissance, I read a whole bunch of stuff about the Italian Renaissance. What sort of stuck for me best was the contrasts between the families, the Medicis, the Borgias, the Della Rovere, like with Pope Sixtus and Pope Julius II. So what I'm trying to say is, the human brain, it's been known, it's not really so much a filing system for dates. It's not even that much of a logic processor. It's more made to process stories about people. We naturally care about people who are interesting to us, either because we like them or we don't like them, or we identify with them. So what I'm saying here is the way school teaches history is close to worthless. Almost no one remembers anything from grade school and high school and much of college history classes. But if it were taught with stories and people, it'd be a lot better. For example, I had an old uncle, old grandfather, and they told me some stories about what had happened in Ireland. And my father told me stories that he heard from his grandfather and father about what had happened in Ireland. I had to know a lot about what happened in Ireland, okay? My grandfather and my uncle got shot, okay, by the British, all right? That story is something you remember, okay? They weren't allowed to own a horse, okay? It was bad. Anyways, it's worthwhile to watch DVD documentaries. If there's any movies about the historical period, those can be great. Like, watching all those great old movies about Rome, like Ben-Hur and, Quo Vadis and Gladiator and, Mark Antony and Julius Caesar, all that stuff that helps you to learn it. But it really stuck with me, these historical novels. And the historical novel is long. Like I said, Gone with the Wind is 49 hours of audio listening. That's a lot. The average documentary is only 1 hour. How are you going to convey in a 30-minute to 1 hour documentary what you can convey in 49 hours? Okay. So I never felt I understood the Civil War in any significant way. Like the Ken Burns documentary, it's a piece of crap. All it does is glorify Lincoln, and he's like one of the biggest jerks that ever. And so anyways, I think that's useful to know, because if you want to educate a person, you got to educate them in a way, like if you want your kid to learn this, you want to learn this yourself, you want to learn it in a way that's going to stick in your brain. And I've studied this from a lot of different directions, and I can just tell you, these books stick in my brain best. And if I had to go back to the subject, I'd go back to the books. And you supplement it, of course, with all the documentaries, the reading, looking at pictures, photographs, if there's any paintings from that time, if there's any unique music for that time. It all works together. Like I said, too, the Civil War was taught to me as, just, the evil South with slavery and wanting to break apart the Union, and thank God that Lincoln, forced them to stay in the Union and to free the slaves. But that's not what it was about. It was about taxation, paying high tariffs. The South was paying almost all the money, and they were pissed off about it, and then they doubled the tariffs. And so the South was really getting screwed. It was like taxation without representation, like 1776 all over again. And then Lincoln basically said, look, you pay the tariff or we'll come over there and we'll kick your butt. And they didn't want to pay it, and they didn't understand that the North outnumbered them, 4-1, plus really more than that, because it had unlimited reserves coming in from Europe. So essentially they were outnumbered about, 6-1. They really had no chance. And not only were they outnumbered, the North had a tremendous advantage in equipment. It was basically they had no chance despite being very brave. Let's see. Only 2% of the Southerners owned slaves. So that whole thing about slavery in the Union, that was just a pretext. What it was really about was the same thing Douglas MacArthur said. What causes war? Undefended wealth. Okay, the South had money, it had cotton, it had land. And then Reconstruction, a lot of Reconstruction with the carpetbaggers and the scallywags was attempts to take the land away from the people of the South. In Reconstruction, they imposed martial law on them. They stole their property from them. Okay, they raised the taxes so the people couldn't pay it. They just steal their property. So, anyways, I found this stuff interesting for learning history. Historical novels are a great way to supplement it and make it memorable.